It's often exciting to look to the future of UNO, what it might be like in times to come. Sometimes, though, it's important to stop and take a good look at the past of the university, the people and the happenings that help make the excitement of future history possible. With this in mind, join me for Reflections in Time. It's the summer of 1984, and we're visiting here in the lovely home of Dr. and Mrs. Merle Brooks, my friend at the university who is a colleague of mine for some 20 years. And what we're doing is reflecting on Merle's time and work here at the university and his observations about the university in a series that we've been putting in the library and in the alumni house called Reflections in Time. And that's just exactly what we want to do, Merle, is reflect on your time, your thoughts about the university, about your work there, about a lot of the people, and some of the events that made life meaningful for you for a good part of, 20-some years. But I don't want to start with that. I want to, and I don't think you and I have known each other for a long time. I don't think I've ever really asked you, certainly not in a situation like this, where in the world you came from, Merle, a little bit about your background, your roots. Where did it all start for you?
Well, it's kind of ironic. My father was a student at Baker University at Baldwin, Kansas. And he was a preacher, studied to be a preacher.
Oh, was that right?
That's right. He met my mother while he was on a circuit in eastern Kansas.
You're telling me he was a circuit rider kind of preacher?
He was a circuit rider preacher.
Yes, that's right.
That's right. And my mother was a school teacher. She had graduated from Emporia. Now, I don't think she got an ordinary B.S. degree, a teaching degree of some kind. And my father was a senior in theology school when I was born, February the 8th, 1916. And we followed around the circuit. He went from church to church and place to place. And one day my grandfather called up and said to my mother, "If you'll come and take care of me, I'll give you a farm." And so, my goodness, that looked real good to a preacher, you know.
Yeah.
And so they moved to the little town of Drexel, Missouri, but the farm was not in Missouri, it was in Kansas, just across the line. In fact, I could throw a rock over into Missouri.
You were right on the line.
I was right on the line. And I was 5 years old when we moved on the farm, and we stayed there until, for 10 years on the farm. And we decided that the farm was not the place, that Dad wanted to get out and start teaching because he had a degree. We left there and went to Lewisburg, Kansas, and that's where I graduated from high school, in Lewisburg, Kansas.
You stayed on the Kansas side of the line.
Stayed on the Kansas side of the line. Lewisburg is about 6 or 8 miles from the line, you see. And in the meantime, I had 4 more brothers and a sister. And we got a chance to sing together. We sang on the radio for a long, long time together, and we had, well, I took out a little bit too much time of our life. It was kind of bad, but so we decided to quit singing and go to college. And we started at Emporia State Teachers College at Emporia, Kansas. We all graduated there, and we all got our wives from the same college.
Is that right?
Yeah. And then along, just as quick as I graduated, and I applied for some schools to teach, because I was interested first primarily in music, and then I decided I wanted to go into medicine, and then I decided I wanted to teach. But the Army got me. 1941, and I was in the Army from 1941 to 1946. And I got out, and whoever thought of the GI Bill was the smartest person I think had ever lived.
Amen.
And I got to go on school. I got my master's in bacteriology at KU. But
you were on that teaching track still.
Well, still on that teaching track. And I decided that wasn't where I wanted to go. That took too much chemistry. So I got to thinking about what course would I really like to teach. And I said, I had a course when I was an undergraduate in water biology. And I said, I want to become a limnologist. A limnologist is a water biologist, you know. An oceanographer is a guy who studies salt water. A limnologist studies fresh water. So I got looking around for the best limnologist in the world, and I found him out at University of Colorado at Boulder. So I got my PhD in both a major in botany and a major in zoo, because you had to have them, because limnology is the study of plants and animals in water.
In fresh water. In
fresh water. And I went right back to teaching at Emporia.
Back home, sir.
Right back home.
Yeah.
And on a Friday afternoon in August, the last day of school, I got a phone call. A phone call from Boulder, Colorado. And the guy said, I got a person here who wants to talk to you. I said, well, hey, this is the last day of school and I'm going on vacation. I said, I don't have much time to talk. I said, who is it? He said, his name is Mabel L. Mabel L? I said, I don't know a Mabel L. Well, he said he's president of Omaha University. Oh, I said, I remember seeing him on TV one time at the Tangerine Bowl. He talked at the middle at the Tangerine Bowl.
1955.
Was that when that was?
I believe so.
Anyway, so I talked to him. He says, we're looking for a botanist and a bacteriologist, and Newell Youngren, who was head of the department, said there was only one graduate that's ever graduated from this college that has the qualifications that you're wanting. And he gave me my name. I was the only one who could teach bacteriology and teach botany at the same time. And Milo said, what you doing? I said, I'm just finishing up, getting ready to go on vacation. He said, when you going? I said, I'm going this evening. He says, this evening? I said, yep. He said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Canada. And he said, well, can I meet you at 9 o'clock in the morning in my office? And he was in Boulder, and I was in Emporia. And I said, well, I'm not really interested in the job. I've got the best job in the world. I've just built a brand new house. I've got everything I wanted. I just built a new building. And he says, I want to talk to you. And he said, I'll tell you what to do. I'll pay for your whole trip on your vacation if you'll stop and see me.
That pricked your ears up.
And I said, well, now there's a cheap way to get a vacation, because all I have to do is say no, you see.
Sure. And
I can get my check to go on by vacation.
But you didn't know how persuasive he might be.
I had no idea what kind of a person that guy was, I'll tell you. So he said, I've got a room reserved for you. I'll have a room at the new Tower Hotel, the one that's there.
Still here.
No, the tornado tore down.
Oh, the one townhouse, you mean?
Townhouse.
Down the hill, right.
Townhouse. From
the university.
And we went in, and I met him at 9 o'clock. And who you suppose is in there? It was Dean Gorman and Dean Wood, or I guess Vice President Wood.
Yeah, I think he was assistant to the chancellor, to the president at that time, I think. And
let's see, and another person or two. It was Dean Thompson.
All right, Thompson.
And we sat there and talked, and he showed me around over the department. I said,
about Dean Lucas maybe too?
No, I don't think Dean Lucas. I think he was gone.
All right.
And I said, where's the head department? Well, he says, on vacation. I said, well, I'm not going to talk to anybody unless I can talk to the head of the department. I said, I'm not. I was just stalling, you see, what I was really doing. He says, so I picked up the phone, and Dr. Bush hadn't gone on vacation.
He was still in town.
And he was here. So we went around looking at the department, and my goodness, it was absolutely not as good as a lot of high schools.
Bad, huh?
Oh, it was worse. It was 15 years behind.
And this year was the year of
1959.
All right.
1959. And so I said, well, I've got a good excuse here to tell him that I can't work here.
And I can go on my paid vacation.
I can go on my vacation. And I kept saying, no, no, no. I said, give him a check. I want to go. I'm getting in a hurry. And he fooled around with that check for a long, long time. And finally he said, how much would it take to get you to come up here? And I thought of my salary that I was getting down in Emporia, and I tripled it. Tripled it. which I knew he wouldn't take. I just knew that he would take.
And you figured, now I can go on vacation.
Now I can go on vacation. So he handed me a check, and he shook my hand, and he says, "You're hired." I just about fell through the floor. Why, Paul, that was more than some of the deans were getting.
Mm-hmm.
And I just couldn't believe it. I said, I made a mistake. I said, I can't come. I've got 56 graduate students down in Emporia. I said, I just can't leave. Well, he says, you said how much? I accepted it, and now he says, we've got a deal. So
He said it firmly, too, I'll
Yes,
bet.
he did. And I looked at him, I said, well, I'm sorry. I really can't do it, because I just built a new home. I just got everything set. So he gave me the check, and, you know, Paul, he asked me where I was going. I went to Canard, Canada, and every time I stopped in a motel, I got a call.
There was a phone call.
Yes, every time. And I got off from over in Canada, and all of a sudden I got a long-distance call from one of my friends down in Kansas, because I had been working with the National Science Foundation Institute, you see.
Yeah, yeah.
He says, Dr. Brooks, you better get home. And I said, why? He says, a lot of changes going on down here. And I said, well, okay, get down here. And so I drove in, and I found out that the president down there had hired me out and another fellow of mine, another co-worker, Dr. Weldon Baker, and another assistant, Joe Novak, to go all over the United States and set up in these National Science Foundation Institute. And I was going to be gone for a year. And I'd been running these institutes, and I knew all the people back in Washington, D.C. And I wasn't about to be gone for a year. I wasn't going to leave home for a year and just get up and go. So we talked about it, and I sat down by Weldon Baker, and Joe's on one side. And Baker said, you know, I've been to Eastern Illinois looking for a job. And Joe says, I've been to Purdue and been looking for a job. I said, what'd you find out? He says, we can both get them. He said, can you get your job? I said, yep, I can get it. He said, let's all three leave, same time. And I said, well, that's going to leave an awful hole here. What are we going to do? He said, and the president wasn't there. It was just the assistant president. So we walked up to the assistant president and says, we're leaving. And, oh, Paul, the fat was in the fire. I'll tell you everything. The next morning I woke up, there was a basket about 3 feet long and about 2 foot high, and it had fruit in it, and it says, please, from the president, please don't leave. But I had already called Mabel L and said I was coming.
And so he still had the door open for you.
Oh, yes, he sure did. And so we got in the car, and he came up the next day, and we drove around all over this town looking for a house to buy. And we got right up here on Broadmoor Heights and found a house and bought it that day.
Is that right?
But we made a mistake. We didn't tell the guy that he had to get out pretty quick, you see. So we never got in that house.
Oh.
We never got in until way down in sometime in October.
But you came and you settled in. What are your first impressions of the university? You mentioned one there that the department was in sad shape, at least physically.
Let me give you my first impression. Now, you were there at that time.
Yes.
You remember the engineering building had just been built.
Oh, yes.
And they had just finished that great big auditorium.
Called the Applied Arts Building.
When it was
first built.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, there was a great big auditorium.
Right. 101.
And I walked in that building, and that room was clear full. It was full. I had never seen that many people. I thought they were all faculty. And I looked around, found out that there were faculty, and they were assistants, and there were secretaries, and there were janitors, and everybody in the whole school was in there. Mabel got up in front of that room, and he started laying low on giving us all the faculty. I mean to tell you, he really gave the faculty a going over. You remember that?
Yes, every fall.
Well, I didn't know that. And I thought, now that's a dirty shame to have somebody come in and have all these secretaries and all these janitors to listen to the faculty get eaten out. So I went home and told my wife, don't unpack, I'm leaving. I said, I can't live with that. I can't figure that out. So I went in the next morning and told him, I said, I don't think I can put up with that. I said, I don't understand that. Oh, he said, forget about it. He says, I always have got to give somebody hell. And so the next night, that next night we had a banquet.
Oh, yes.
And I was very lucky. Remember, we had the banquet right there in that.
Every fall
and
in the auditorium.
I sat down by Dean Utley and Breck Lambert and Paul Kennedy. And they just sat and laughed at me until they cried, because I was so serious about that. I couldn't figure out what in the world was going on. So they said, don't pay attention to him. He's a great guy. He's got the biggest heart, but he just really likes to chaw out the faculty. So I said, well, if that's the kind of a guy he is, if he doesn't bite, well, then we'll get along. And so I said, all right, if they can take it, I can too. And you know, that's the only time he ever said a harsh word to me or anybody I ever heard him, except in those meetings. He was accessible. He was easy to get to. His door was open any time. You could call him up on the telephone and say, I want to see you. I need to work with you. I need some answers. And he would be right there. He was a man of the hour for that university. He was a person who really knew how to operate, knew how to control that university, knew what had to be done and how it had to be done. I got to look at the faculty, and I found out it was the finest faculty I had ever seen in my life. And I got to checking, and I found out it had the highest percentages of PhDs of any faculty that I had ever been around. I mean, that man had brought in people that were outstanding. Ralph Wardle, you remember? Like that, remember?
Yes, indeed.
All kinds of people that were in there. I can't remember the fellow who was in math. He was such
Jim Earle.
Oh, that's right.
Jim Earle.
And Macmillan. Oh man, what a fine teacher!
Harry Rice.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
And some of the finest faculty, Paul Kennedy, and all those guys, and I really enjoyed them. Well, I forgot to tell you, I had a minor in science education. And that's where I got started in the process of working in the National Science Foundation.
Oh.
And so I got acquainted with things. And so I walked into the department, and I asked Dr. Bale, Dr. Bush, how much equipment are you applying for? He said $250. I says, I'm going to write a budget up myself and turn it in. He says, you're going to turn in a budget? I said, yep. So I wrote up a budget, and I asked for $250,000.
We're talking about the budget.
That's right, the budget. Well, let me explain. At that time, we had 5 hospitals who were training nurses in this area. And I had 250 nurses to train. And I had to teach them bacteriology, and I had to teach them human anatomy and physiology. And I went into the bacteriology room and looked around, and we only had 3 oil immersion scopes. And you cannot teach bacteriology without oil immersion scopes, because you can't see the bacteria. 3 scopes for 250 students. And I says, well, this can't be done. I says, I've got to have 15 more scopes, at least 15 more scopes, because the lab will hold 17 people or 18 people. And so I went in with that $250,000 request, and he looked at that and he says, you've got to be crazy. I said, no. I said, you asked me to do the job up here, and I said, I expect you to produce. He said, well, I can't raise $250,000. I said, well, what can you raise? He said, well, what's the minimum you have to get by? Well, I says, I got to have 15 scopes, and they're $1,000 apiece. So there's $15,000. I've got to have an autoclave, and I got to have some other equipment. I don't have any Petri dishes. But I do have a lot of tubes and a few other things, and I don't have any media and all these things. And I said, at least I've got to have $20,000. So he looked at me long and hard. He said, all right, go back and order it. So
was this Dr. Bale?
That was Dr. Bale.
Because you hadn't gotten anywhere with the department head. He had no money to work with.
He had no money at all.
So you went right to the top.
I did. This was kind of a funny thing. I could never do that at any other the school down below. But you could go straight to Model Bale. You could go to the dean, and the dean would say, go right on to the top. Dean Thompson would always say, go on to the top.
So you had your answer really the same day.
Yeah.
That's marvelous.
And so we got these scopes, and the students were just as happy as they could be, and it was really something to have 15, well, that made 18 oil immersion scopes, so these nurses could be able to...
Now, for that program, you were pretty well equipped.
Real fine.
Yeah.
Well, we needed an autoclave, but there wasn't any steam in the building. So we had to buy one of these great big old pressure cookers.
You were housed in the main administration building.
That's right. We were on the third floor.
Right.
And all we had were 3 labs at that time. 3 labs and really no lecture rooms. We had to lecture in different places we could find.
Just any room.
That's right. And so we got those things, and Dr. Bush just looked like he was in shock when those things came in. And so I said, well, what goes next? And he had hired a young fellow by the name of Keeler, I can't remember his first name, to teach botany. But I soon saw that that guy wasn't going to be able to teach botany at all, because all he was an algologist, just algae, that's all he knew. And I talked to Dr. Bush about it. He said, we'll get rid of him at the end of this semester. I said, oh, not that soon, surely. He said, yep, we'll get rid of him. And he says, you can take over botany. Well, I said, there's nothing to teach botany with. So I got figuring out how I'd have to teach that. It ended up to about $40,000.
Here we go again.
And I went into him, and he said, get out. He says, I've already given you more than you deserve anyway. I said, all right, then I'll get it myself. So I sat down and wrote a proposal to the National Science Foundation, told them what I needed and why I needed it, and sent it to the people I knew back there. And I ended up with $59,000 of money.
That's 19 better than the 40 you were talking about.
That's right. And I got slides, I got equipment, I got everything I needed to teach botany. So we got along real fine. But what I wanted to do was to run institutes, to train teachers, to bring teachers in and to bring them up to date. But we didn't have a master's program. See, there was no master's in biology, and nothing in physics, nothing in chemistry, and nothing in math. So I went to my dean, and I said, hey, let's get a master's degree, combine zoology, physics, and chemistry, and put them together and make a master's program out of general science. And when that got out, why, Dr. Earl wanted in math. So we combined all those things, and we got through a master's program in general science.
Remember about what year that happened in?
Imagine that was about 1962. And
about 6 years before the merger.
That's right.
Right.
So I got that in. We got that thing through. It took quite a while to get through the graduate department, because they looked at that thing pretty jaundiced.
Yeah.
It was a hybrid. I mean, tell you.
Sort of a mix.
It was a mix. But anyway, we had enough good faculty members that the National Science Foundation said it's fine, real fine. So I applied for a grant, and I got a $250,000 grant to bring in teachers from around the area to the institute. And it worked out real fine.
To improve their capability as science teachers.
And not only that, there's a 15% of it went to the school. Now, in most schools, they would let you, the director, keep 10%, and then 5% went into the school to take care of the business, you know. And I had that 10%, so I needed that 10% to buy tables and desks, typewriters, lettering head, you know, all kinds of. Sometimes I'd send out 1,000 letters a week, pay stamps.
You sound more like an administrator at this point than a teacher.
Well,
you're busy,
you had to
busy.
do that. I was teaching a full load and doing all this thing.
And a full load then was
but
at least 12 hours,
I want to say something about a person that I think deserves credit. There was a little girl, only 17 years old, walked in my office and applied for a job. And I looked at her and I said, boy, you don't know what you're getting into if you want this job. And I showed her what she said. She says, yep, I can handle it. Her name was Gail Enquist. I bet you knew her.
I knew her. I know her.
Gail,
remember?
Without that girl, there was no way possible for me to ever run those institutes. And then when she graduated, I got her sister, and I had the Enquist for 8 years while I was working those institutes.
A sister dynasty that helped you do the job.
And they were absolutely the finest secretaries and assistants that I ever had in my life. Never did I ever see anything. Gail Enquist, I expect, is the best secretary that ever walked on that campus at any time, and anywhere, any place, anywhere. Anyway, we kept getting money, and then one day we had a meeting with Dr. Marquardt and Dr. McMillan and Dr. Earl, and at that time, I think Hunsiger was coming in.
As the head of math, or as a part of the math department.
Yes, but he later became head.
He did indeed.
And so we decided what equipment we needed in the whole to make the whole, all of them, up to standard. So we sat down and figured out, and it turned out to be $590,000 that we needed to bring all the departments up to a standard. And we sat down and I wrote the thing up, and we got $590,000 to buy all the equipment that we needed.
Now, at the time you did this, all this grant writing and submission, we didn't have any grants office as such, did we?
No.
It was you and the secretary, the Enquist girls, and the government, really, wasn't it?
That's all, and the help of the like Dr.
various departments.
Yes, various departments.
Right.
There was nobody to help you, nobody. But I knew how to write the institute, how to write the program.
Remarkable.
And I knew who I had to go to and who had to see these proposals.
Your background with the National Science Foundation really was paying off now, wasn't it?
Yes, because I was back there an awful lot. And I did research on teachers, high school teachers, found out what they needed. And they had that report, you see, back there. And they've been studying it, and it had been reported all over the nation.
And your proposal request would confirm your earlier findings.
Right. They spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on training of teachers. And they're going to have to go back and do the same thing again. Because you remember there's a turnover of science teachers every 9 years. Complete turnover. So we're going to have to do that again.
As we do this in 1984, this tape, you were saying the same ground has to be plowed again.
It's got to be plowed again. Same thing. So I found that it was a enjoyable thing. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of hard work and and then we began to get a lot of good professors. This is when things began to pop. Things began to build.
Was the enrollment building now along with the department?
Oh my goodness! And all departments began. Physics, chemistry, math, and biology, tripled, quadrupled, and we had the equipment to do what we wanted to do, and we were not ashamed to be interviewed by people who come in to see. Was
Sputnik the thing that really started all this?
And John F. Kennedy is the person who was responsible for elevating the National Science Foundation to what it really was. And it's gone down an awful lot, but it'll come back up, I'm quite sure. So then we got more. Then we got a whole lot more institutes, but we didn't need as much equipment anymore like that. So then it was beginning to build faculty. The whole job was to build faculty. And we got lots and lots of good faculty. Some came in and looked at the thing and stayed a year and left. Others stayed with us. And I think that overall the department built some real fine faculty members. We had Ingham and Dr. Lunt, and we got one of my old former students, Roger Sharp.
Yeah.
He was one of my first students I had. In fact, I directed a thesis, not a thesis, but a project for him on a lake out here at the Allwine Farm.
Yes.
In 1960, as a student, Roger Sharp. And so I got acquainted with him. Of course, I knew his father, and you knew
yes, indeed.
his father.
Yes, indeed.
A fine family and a fine student. He was an ornithologist, birdman. But he was a fine photographer also.
And still a strong member of our faculty, and environmentalist, and active in many things.
That's right. I'm sure he is.
Now, you're starting as you go along here. You're really telling the story so beautifully as we go along. I almost hate to interrupt you. And I'm not really wanting to do that, but what I want you to do is move along with the university a little bit, Merle.
Okay.
You know, you've given us a nice picture of the growth and development and the expansion of your department. But as you reflect, going beyond that, as you often did, you had your eyes and ears open for the total university, I think. Did you feel the whole university was coming along in those years, in the 60s and the Sputnik period? Was it really booming totally, or was it just in various smaller areas?
Well, the education department was going fine. I think the education under the leadership of the various deans they had, Dean Gorman, I think, quit a little too early.
Yeah.
And
Paul Kennedy
took over. It became great that time. And they brought in a lot of fine young men. I would say the education department was one of the top in the nation. I don't think you could go anywhere and found a better education department. Physics had its problems because it's hard to find a physicist that will take the pay that most colleges want to pay.
They can make more in industry in various places.
But let me say something about chemistry. Chemistry had, I suspect, 5 of the finest teachers that ever walked. Paul Stageman and Lindstenberg and a young man by the name of Sullivan.
Sullivan, still there.
And Chemnitz. And I think the fellow who's head of the department now, I can't remember what his name is.
Roger. I can't remember the other name too, but we'll fill that in sometime.
Okay, let's
fill
that in.
But in any event,
he was really fine. I would say that they were the finest teachers in the whole country in chemistry. Math kind of fell down a little bit because we lost Hunsaker. I watched English. I thought English was great. My boys, both my sons graduated from UNO, and they thought that English was about as good as it possibly could be. Then, of course, psychology was one of the top departments. Psychology was led by people who knew what they were doing and how they could do it. I remember the trouble we had over the first computer. I don't remember if you remember that or not.
No, I don't.
Well, we got that on NSF too. And Hunsaker is the fellow that applied for it. Hunsaker and I sat down right on this floor, right in here, and we wrote an application for that computer.
What about year might that have been?
That had to be right close to about 1967, I imagine.
Just shortly before the merger, really.
That's right. And he run into a little problem over that with Kirk Naylor. I don't know what happened over that. Kirk Naylor was assistant president at that time. And Kirk wanted it put somewhere else, and I think it was put over in the main building instead of over into the math department.
There wasn't an argument as to what the unit should be, but where it should be.
Go. And we lost Hunsaker over that, which was a great loss, and I felt really bad about that. But anyway, the whole college built beautifully, and then when Kirk Naylor became president, I felt that was one of the finest things that ever happened.
You were talking about really the entrance as our president of Kirk Naylor, and you indicated you thought that was a fine thing. You want to pick it up right there?
Well, let me go back just a little bit.
Okay.
And tell you about Kirk Naylor. Way back in, I'd say in the early 50s, I was visiting high schools from Emporia, Kansas. It was my job to go out and visit high school. And I went to a little town. I don't want to mention the town because it was so little. And I knocked on the door and asked him if I could, told him who I was, and I asked him if I would could be some help with his science teacher, because that was our job at Emporia, was to help science teachers within a radius of 100 miles. And who do you suppose answered the door?
You're not going to say
Kirk Naylor.
Is that right?
Kirk Naylor. And that was one of his first jobs as a superintendent of school. And then when I enrolled at KU, I got in line, and lo and behold, Kirk Naylor was in the same line I was. So one day, the phone rang, and Dr. Mabel L called me up. He said, "Would you come to my office?" And you know this is the way he operated.
Yeah.
He would just call you up out of the blue and say, "Would you come to my office?" I said, "Sure." So I went in, and he said, "Do you know Kirk Naylor?" Well, I said, "I sure do. I really know him." He said, "Well, I think I'm going to hire him." Well, I said, "I don't think you can do a better job. I don't think you can find a better man anywhere." I said, I've found him to be a great fellow, a very intelligent fellow, and I've enjoyed him for a long, long time. And I think he'd be a lot of help, a lot of service to this university. So he came in then as vice president, I think it was. I'm not sure what his rating was, but it was pretty close to the top.
Yes, yes.
And one day I was sat and talked to him. I said, "Kirk, when I first came here, I went out to Irvington, and they had an ice cream store out there. I don't remember that ice cream store.
I do. A nice place to go Sunday afternoon.
Sunday afternoon. And I said I was sitting there in my car, and I had Kansas license on. And a man and his wife walked up, and he looked at me, and he said, "From Kansas?" "Yep." And he said, what are you doing up here?" I said, "Well, I just took a job here at
University of Omaha in those days.
Right, University of Omaha. I'm trying to think of his name right now.
Oh, well, no matter. Let it go.
Anyway, it's a real... And he says, "Well, what do you teach?" I said, "Well, I would prefer to teach limnology, but I says I can't find any lakes around here." And he says, "I can find lakes because I was the county extension agent." He said, "I'll show you where these lakes are."
Is that right?
I said, "Well, when would you be ready to go?" He said, "Almost any evening." And so he took me out, and the first place he stopped was out here at the Allwine Farm. Now, why can't I remember his name? It's Dale.
I think I know him too, but neither of us came up with a name, but that's all right.
I had it right on my tip of my tongue. Anyway, he took me out there, and I met Mr. and Mrs. Allwine, and they were planting trees out there. And I was talking to him what he's going to do about the farm, and I asked him if I could use this little lake down there, and he said sure, and so forth. And not long after that, I got a call from Kirk Naylor, and he says, "Mr. Allwine wants to talk to us." So he and I went out to talk to Mr. Allwine. He says, "We've been thinking about this place, and we're not getting along very good." He said, "Would you think the college would like to have this place?" And Kirk said, "Well, sure. What's the strings to it?" He said that the strings is that there would be no fertilizer put on the farm. It has to be all organic farming. He says, "I will not allow anybody to come in here with fertilizers or chemicals or anything." And we sat there and talked for quite a while, and I looked at that, and the farm was not really good. It needed fertilizer. And I said, "Kirk," I said, "this really should go down to the University of Nebraska, down there, Agriculture College, instead up here." And boy, that was the wrong thing to have said. Because he told Mabel L that, and I'll tell you, I got eliminated so quick it was pitiful. You
weren't involved in it from then on.
I got called up and said, "Don't ever say anything like that again." Anyway, it turned out we've got the farm. He gave the farm, and he gave us also the money to build the greenhouse that's on there, and he gave us some money to set the greenhouse up. And it's been a great asset to the whole university.
Turned out to be a good thing for us, didn't it?
I wish I could remember his name, because he said he owned the University of Omaha. I said, "How'd that?" He said he sent through 5 girls through that university. anyway, he was a real fine fellow. Well, Kurt had played a role in getting that thing, and I think Kurt also is the one that's responsible for calling the science hall the All-Wine Hall.
Which was a very appropriate name in light of what you've been saying and their
well,
attachments to the
that
university.
farm was worth, I suppose, $250,000-$300,000, and he gave the department, I don't know, $300,000. I mean, $35,000 or $40,000, and then he built that greenhouse, part of the greenhouse. So that was a big help on that thing.
Well, during your years here, the department as well as the university really grew and changed. And you know, there were a lot of people, and you've done it so nicely here in our tapes, told about a lot of the people and their impact on the university. Are there some people that you can reflect on? And I'll try to help you with names if you forget some of them, but you mentioned Naylor, you mentioned Bale, you mentioned a variety of other people, fleetingly. I suppose the university's main strength is not in equipment but in people, and you emphasize the quality of the faculty. Are there some names that you haven't mentioned that you really feel have played a big influence on our university?
Well, let me go back just one thing. That fellow, that name was Dale Smart.
You got it?
Dale Smart.
All right.
I got him.
Give him credit. He was the man that led you to All-Wine Farm.
That's right, All-Wine Farm.
And all because you went to Irvington for ice cream.
That's right. Yes, there are a lot of people who had a great influence on that college, as far as I'm concerned. Stanley Trickett. A lot of people thought Stanley Trickett was maybe a little bit of a egotistical person, but listen, he was a solid teacher. He was a fine man to work with, and and then another man I think that deserves a lot more credit than he's ever been given was Vic Blackwell in the art department.
Still in 1984 a member of the department.
He was one of the finest men I ever worked with in my life. Then there's a young man over in English. There's Glenn Newkirk, but I'm thinking of the fellow that went to Pakistan. He's a blonde, little. I'm sorry, I can't remember.
I can't think of his name. The name that comes to mind of one who's been there a long time and still is Bruce Baker.
That's him.
Aha! I didn't realize Bruce had been to Pakistan.
Bruce Baker, I suspect, made one of the greatest influences. And then there were two women in the English department that were outstanding, really outstanding. They were good teachers and made a great contribution to the whole college. I suspect Rod, what was the Crane, assistant to the
president and professor of economics.
Can I tell a story about him?
Sure you can.
Well, the first day I walked in to school and enrolling, I sat down right beside Rod Crane. I didn't know him. I didn't know anybody. Everybody was a stranger. And he introduced him, and I said, well, I'm in the biology department. And he says, asked him something about my family. I said, yeah, I've got 4 brothers. They're all engineers. And he says, there's a new company coming out called Xerox. He says, do you suppose have you ever heard about them? I said, yeah, sure. I said, I was just talking to my brother about Xerox. And he said, my brother said if he had $1 million, he'd put it in right now. And he sat around there for a while. First thing you know, he got up and left. And finally came back, and he says, well, I hope you're right. I said, what do you mean? He said, I just invested $100,000 in Xerox. I said, you mean you invested $100,000 on my word from my brother? He says, well, you're a scientist. You ought to know what Xerox is. He ought to know. If
intuition can be correct, there's an example of it, huh?
And about 5 years later, I don't know whether I should tell you how much he sold that for or not, but he made plenty on that $100,000 investment. I've heard different stories, so I don't know exactly, but I know it was at least $3 million.
It was more than your brother had hoped to invest originally, right?
That's right.
You know, one of the interesting things that you are doing by the way you're talking about your time and life at the university is you're cutting across departmental lines. You're talking about people, faculty, secretaries, a variety of things. I think as I listen and watch what you're saying here in the summer of '84, as you look back on those many years, that you really had a broad picture of the university. And part of that was embodied in something that we came to know, but which we didn't have for many years in my time there, and yours was a faculty senate. You were involved with that too.
Oh yes. The faculty senate was, again, the whole outline was made right here on this floor.
This floor in this living room is a busy place.
Room. Vic Blackwell and let's see, Vic Blackwell, 3 or 4 others who were working on it. I can't remember who all they were.
Roy Steele?
Steele was one of them.
One name came to mind. Maybe we'll think of the others.
And we sat down and we discussed what a Senate should be. Now, we had some problems with the Senate. The Senate was not something that people wanted. A lot of people wanted.
Right.
And one of them was Mabel L.
I was wondering what his feeling was.
No, he was not very happy about it.
There he went, some
the
of
other
his
was
authority.
Kurt Naylor. Kurt Naylor was right here, sitting right here. And we sat down, we worked, and I had gotten a hold of 5 different Senate plans from 5 different universities. And we read them all over, and we looked at them, and we found one that we thought that would fit. And so we started working it out. And we had little problems on account of the fact that they didn't want to involve too many people. I said, the more people you involve in the Senate, the better off you're going to be.
I'm with you on that. That's a good idea.
Because the instant you leave people out, they're going to feel, the heck with this thing. I don't want anything to do with it. Oh, another person, it was Jack Hill. Jack Hill was
from the business college.
That's right. He was another member that was very much interested in the Senate. And he wanted to limit it to professors and associate professors, and that's all. Well, I said, that won't work. It just will not work, because I was involved in a Senate down in Emporia, and that was the way it was, and it didn't do a thing. You've got to get everybody involved. Because
it's basically an advisory body, isn't it?
That's all it was.
Yeah.
You just make advice.
But it came into being.
It came into being on account of the fact that they were willing to work on it, and we voted it in. Now, it served its purpose for at least 6 or 8 years. But the thing that broke it up was that very thing that I'm talking about, Paul. We did not know there's going to be an influx of lots and lots and lots of young faculty members who had only one thing in mind, their own little individual future. The people who were started out were interested in the university. But after we brought in hundreds of new faculty members who wanted it in the Senate for their own personal gain, the Senate began to go down and down and down. And they began to change it and begin to make it. But that first Senate, for the first 3 years or 4 years, did more to make that university into a university that was pulled together, held together, worked together, dreamed together, and almost died together. They really worked on that hard.
You know, we've only got about 2-3 minutes left on our tapes and our reflecting here. You've been doing such a great job. But one more thing I want to reflect on, or 2 or things if we have time. One is you've spent so much of your life, yes, in working on advancing the university financially and growth of the departments, material things, but much of your time was devoted to teaching and to students. As you look back on your years of teaching, what are some of the sources of real satisfaction to you, Merle?
That's not an easy question to answer, but the people the students, I have over 700 students that I started out who have PhDs. Over 700.
Is that right? That's the size of a small college.
I have 3,000 students that I had in class who are MDs. I have 5,000 of my former students who are nurses. See. I have almost 10,000 students who are teachers or were teachers at one time. I can go almost any city in the United States and find somebody that I have had as a student. Now, I look at the success of students. I had one young fellow walk in here just the day before yesterday. His name was John Scott, Dave Scott's son. He was a boy who didn't want to really go to school. But I realized that he was an outdoor man. He wanted to be outside. And I got him interested in limnology. He got his master's in limnology, and now he's one of the top men.
Out at Yellowstone Park?
No, he just left Yellowstone Park, and he's going down in Arkansas. And going to be one of the top men down in Arkansas.
Now, in our last minutes together, just take a moment, if you will. You've been at this a long time, as a teacher, as a mover of monies. As you look at the university totally, Merle, what are some of your personal feelings of satisfaction for the years and the university and what it's been to you and the teaching work that you've been involved with?
Well, I think one of the easiest and the nicest thing I can say is that the university has really been good to me. I'm very happy that I made the change to come to this university and to get acquainted with the people, the fine people who made up the university. I have no regrets at all of making the move. I hope and pray that the university lives up to what the people who have gone before it set the example to, and I hope that it can turn out as many good students in the future as it has in the past.
Well, I think that's a nice note on which to wind up our visits together. I think your comments on the early part of this tape, talking about the many students that you were involved with, gave an indication to those who watched this tape, not only of your contributions to us as a financial portion of our university, but the thousands of students that you've made an impact on. You're a credit to the university and to your profession. And in retirement, I hope you and your good wife have years of enjoyment. And in the summer of 1984, I want to thank you so sincerely for taking time to reflect on your time at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Merle, thank you a lot.
Paul, it's been a pleasure. And you've been responsible for a lot of it.
Thank you. And so we wind up tape number 3 in Reflections in Time, summer 1984.